Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this latest installment of Fresno Writers Live. This is an online series to celebrate new books by Fresno writers. It's nice to see familiar names and faces pop into the session tonight. This is our fourth and final reading for this summer, and we are here to spend some time together this evening with Sarah A. Chavez and Erik Wilbur and their excellent new poetry books. So thank you all again for being here. My name is Jefferson Beavers, and I serve on the organizing committee of the Fresno State Creative Writing Alumni Chapter. I am very happy to welcome you to the Zoom space this evening, and I would like to acknowledge that this broadcast is originating from Fresno, California, which is the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono peoples. Tonight, I am very pleased to introduce your host, Jessica Turney, and I'm going to take just a minute to spotlight her. Give me 1 second. Hi, Jessica. Tonight, your host is Jessica Turney. She is a Fresno State alumna with an MFA in poetry. She grew up in Madera, and Jessica works in our university's TRIO Student Success Services program as a reading and writing specialist. Jessica does some amazing work there. She supports the success of students who are veterans, students with disabilities, first-gen college students, among others. She's a wonderful addition to our staff on campus, and we're lucky to have her tonight as the host. Jessica's work has been published in the magazines Mayday, Nell, and A Sharp Piece of Awesome, among others. And she was a finalist for Frontier Poetry's Open Prize. And today also happens to be Jessica's birthday. Woo! That's amazing volunteering on your birthday, Jessica. Thank you. So at this time, please welcome your host for this evening, Jessica Turney.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jefferson. Wish you didn't add in the birthday bit, but thank you very much. So I'm so happy to have been asked to be a part of this. I'm excited, and I'm just going to get right into it because even though I'm not reading, I'm nervous for some reason. Before I talk about how wonderful this chapbook is by Erik Wilbur, I want to mention that I had the privilege of sharing a workshop space with Erik during our MFA program at Fresno State. And it still amazes me how I went from reading his poems on a leaf of paper in the classroom to reading them from a page in his very own chapbook. It's inspiring, really, and it reminds me to keep working at this thing. But Erik put in the work, and he always did. His poems are smart, technical, and intricate, but more importantly, they're honest, as he confronts pain and grief in this chapbook without hesitation. The writer is an observer of himself, his relationships, specifically with his father in this collection, but manages to be in the thick of memory and nostalgia at the same time. And I agree with the blurb written by my fellow poet, Ronald Zarigian. Each poem is a careful dissection. It's a rebuilding of memory, of experiences. What I can do is honest, blunt, a journey of understanding, acceptance, and the possibility of forgiveness. In Erik's poem, My Father's Hands Revisited, the speaker says, my father crawled under freight trucks for 30 years, earning this analogy. His greatest pride, his will to push through stones with his fingers or churn against clay every hour to anchor us some unseen distance of earth, so we could study blades of grass from every angle. That is how these poems are written, from every angle. A careful examination that still makes room for vulnerability. He allows the reader into his poems this way from every angle, and he has earned every line. I am honored to be introducing him to you today, reading from his debut chapbook, What I Can Do. Please welcome Erik Wilbur.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a beautiful introduction, and I'm so grateful that you are hosting tonight and we're able to introduce, because we did have a lot of fun in workshops together. I want to read a couple things before I get into the poems. I just want to thank Jefferson and my fellow alumni who made this reading happen. It's really a privilege to read with Sarah and for the Fresno writing community, where with the help of my mentors, like Tim Skeen, who's here tonight, thank you for joining us, and my classmates, with the help of my mentors and my classmates, I acquired the ability to write the poems that became What I Can Do. These poems that help me navigate that formless painscape of grief. And to provide a brief introduction to the book, it's a meditation on the experience of being an adult child of an alcoholic and on the experience of losing my father to addiction. And I want to start with the opening poem, Simple Future. As I drive us back from the Carson River, he rolls his head away from the window and tells me again what will happen when he dies. He'll be cremated, and us kids will take his ashes to the high country. He'll show us the exact spot when he gets close, but that's not for 20 years or so, he says. Then it's quiet again. And because I can't picture him alive after another 20 years of using, I imagine him 20 years ago, sober at the wheel of his service truck, driving miles past the freeway exit home, holding the thought of disappearing into the Sierras. Those dry years have gone, and now it's easier to believe he's always thought in addict mathematics, to think of his turning around and coming home to our crooked teeth, of braces and rides to band practice, of first cars and tuition, as attempts to counter this side of the equation. But if just once he dropped his work clothes in a pile on the garage floor, and that night stayed up to watch Aliens without promising to, or bartering with himself, and then I fell asleep on the living room floor, with my head on his belly while Sigourney Weaver fought for her life from inside a cargo loader, and my head rising and falling on his breath. What kind of arithmetic is that? Ahead of us, high beams ring darkness from another mile of pine trees. Over the back seat, our fishing poles clink softly through each turn. And as we sit silently watching the road, I think of how he'll feel in my hands, how I'll wait for a good gust to drop him into the wind, how he will not stop. This next poem is called The Mad Child King Wants to Drown Every Bird in the Kingdom. From the deck, my father can't kill woodpeckers with his pellet gun, but he tries anyway, like the child king who wanted to drown every bird in the kingdom out of envy, not of their flight, but of their distinct songs for desire and fear, because he only had his father's one song for everything, the dissonant scale of home, noise swallowed from rattling amber bottles. And still, birds have the gall to sing as if every living thing could as easily tell the world what it means. To this day, I believe, untethered to us, the child king would drown every perched song in earshot, even a chicken for squawking without shame. Or maybe not. Perhaps he never hated birds at all. It's hard to know him any longer than an hour. Perhaps he said something once about the flood, that if it had lasted a while longer, buzzards couldn't have waited it out by climbing and gliding, waiting to see if the good lioness would starve on the deck of the ark. Perhaps he got it in his head that buzzards learned their cry during that 39th day, and that they're still cursing God over sore wings, not praying for carrion like everyone thinks. Perhaps the child king doesn't mind buzzards, but then why would I feel guilty sitting here rooting for the woodpecker as my father leans back in his deck chair and loads the pellet gun? Unless the child king could have drowned every bird in the kingdom, if not for us, his children, and our stupid ultimatums. This poem is called About Surviving. And it's printed this way on the page. I'm not just doing that as an added challenge to myself, reading it sideways. Great Grandpa Earl tried to shoot Grandpa Jack one night with a .38 when a mouthy game of cards ended with, "I brought you into this world, you son of a bitch." But his arthritic fingers couldn't get the hammer back before my father, 12 then, wrestled the revolver away. That's not exactly how my father tells the story between downing beers while I drive us to my sister's wedding. Last winter, Grandpa Jack died holding Aunt Karen's hand in a fistful of bedsheet. A kinder man, my father says, would have let go on New Year's Eve, 1956, after a rival motorcycle club charged him in a Lincoln Continental and sent him barreling into a ditch off West Capitol Avenue. 20 yards from the twisted fork of his motorbike, he could have been a kinder man. But Grandpa Jack waited, both arms broken, for the paramedics to come light the lucky strike he'd somehow worked between his lips. That .38 could have gone off too, but then I wouldn't have met him. nor seen my father surrender to a force greater than resentment. At Christmas, Grandpa Jack swayed in his chair. After his tar-fingered lungs had strangled him to sleep mid-sentence, my father got up and placed the rubber mask over Grandpa Jack's nose and mouth with the same careful motion he showed me for setting gaskets to engine blocks. And if Grandpa Jack had died in a ditch in '56, 4 years before my father's conception, this poem would have died there too, along with the Wilbur family alcoholism, the transmission of which my father thinks he can prevent by telling stories like the one about Grandpa Earl's arthritic fingers to inoculate me against self-pity. But he tells too few, and the ones he does only as play-by-plays. So as if they're my memories, I must add lies to make them useful. He says, one night, Grandpa Jack chased your aunt through the house with a knife from the sink, and I watch a man grab his daughter by her blouse and fall back as she tears away. I block her bedroom door with a dresser. I give him half a bottle of wild turkey from which to drink until he falls asleep. I lock the tatter of her blouse in a soft cage of knuckles until morning. Proof. The fact is, I was made from what Whitman called father stuff, from a current and from being held. This, the raw physiology of it, may explain why most fathers think only of pushing their sons into the world, and most mothers only of keeping them from it. But facts only tell us half of every story, and never the half we need. I have a photograph taken just weeks after I was born. I was sleeping on his bare chest. He was slouched in an armchair with his fingers laced like rivulets under my feet. These are facts, even if he forgot. And even if all I remember from being with him before my mother took my sister and me to Arizona is the smell of shop grease and dipping tobacco, he once held me the way a riverbed wants to hold a river. This poem is called I Know This. A man stopped drinking. His ex-wife sent his kids back for a month every summer and for a week after Christmas. Most days, by 7 a.m., the man was already turning box wrenches under a Kenworth in a blue twill button-up, which he often lifted from a pile of previous day's work clothes on the garage floor. From my half-brother's window, I once watched the man lung steam his fists at dawn. He'd stand outside his idling service truck, waiting for the cab to heat up and for the frost to thin enough so the wipers could break it. Then he'd back through a sour wraith of diesel exhaust into the street. He'd turn the wheel. I can imagine the pain in his shoulder, sharp and sudden, like a stray welding spark in his bones. The man has invented countless hyphenated words, all including shit, fuck, or cock, to name this and other kinds of pain. He has a word for when a wrench slips and a knuckle splits on a mounting bolt. One for when Roger Craig fumbles late in the fourth quarter. One for responding to a fratricidal threat over a few $100. I've never heard his word for when you can't do a damn thing about the fact that soon after you fix the truck you must fix, it will haul building materials to another square mile of stripped and leveled California grassland. But he must have one. Maybe it doubles for his word for when you can't sleep because sleep takes you too quickly to work again. After almost 20 years sober, the man sits in the TV room, opiated. He won't tell me what's led him back to using. Instead, we watch a 3-2 game in the sixth and talk about the DH, how it takes too fucking much away from the game. And I wonder, but don't ask, what time of day he lips his first chew. More than twice in the past year, he's told me the ballistics of a .243 Winchester. The bullet leaves the muzzle at 3,200 feet per second, rises 2 inches, starts to fall at 150 yards. For deer, it's less humane than a .30-06, but it's good for coyotes. This is the titular poem, What I Can Do. It's Wednesday. My father is alive. When I call, he tells me he's been catching up on sleep he lost in the hospital, where every hour a nurse would check for signs of delirium tremens. I call to say some things I hope will mean the difference. But as I begin to, he interrupts by asking how the Giants are looking. And I remember the August he lived with Palo Verdes, which have no voices, but cicadas crack their wings and hide so well on desert trees that I imagined branches crying like arcing power lines as we walked the grounds on visitation days at Hazleton, the walled city of the almost dead. It's Wednesday. He's alive. My only voice hides on the green branch of my throat. The bullpen's struggling, I tell him, but the bats are coming around. A song for my father on the occasion of his overdose. Hours ago, a deputy sheriff found his body, and now I'm trying to imagine I've never heard Zeppelin II as I lie on my living room floor, attempting to conjure the passenger seat of his doorless CJ7 and the parking lot outside Tower Records. He fed the CD to the deck and said, "You need to hear this," as if it held some ultimate truth. Tonight, he sings the guitar parts while plucking the steering wheel, and I find something like forgiveness in the belief that instead of a man, he would have rather been every note Jimmy plays in a solo of Heartbreaker. The record plays on, and in my mind, he's 9 years old, his age when the solo of Heartbreaker became possible. The day an Atlantic Studios engineer captured its possibility on magnetic tape, so it could later be digitized, so I can hear 46 seconds of 1969 tonight in my living room again and again without loss. In 69, despite his father's drinking, his mind is mostly blank tape. He has faith in impossible things. Faith he'll become something other than a man who sneaks to the garage at Thanksgiving to drink vodka from 2-ounce bottles and stuff empties into rolled sleeping bags. In early 69, he's a boy whose voice is still soft and nimble. He hasn't heard the trills and bends his tongue and jaw will want to become. Notes he never seemed to believe spawned from Jimmy's hands. The too perfect expression of rock and roll, of play and rage and desire and surrender and birth and rebirth. A fatherless song of possibility riding radio waves at the speed of light. Invisible and mostly silent because speakers make up so little of the cosmos. And when silent, dormant in my memory, the notes he'd have been instead of a man, the notes I need to hear. Two more poems. This is called What Really Happened. My father didn't overdose. A rabid coyote bit him by the woodshed of his mountain home. He didn't want to believe the coyote was rabid, so he didn't tell anyone about the bite. And none of us were there to notice his limp or the dark spot on his pant leg where the blood kept soaking through. It seems now like we'd sent an ambulance to his house every week for years, sometimes just in case. But of course, we'd stopped that only weeks before the rabies bit him by the woodshed. That's the thing about viruses that destroy the brain. They're patient. They're real motherfuckers. After reading reports from a California wildfire 6 weeks before my father's overdose. Somewhere my father drinks from veins of fallen leaves. He termites the downed logs of his life. The fire that will take him starts as smoke rising from pine leader. He knows he can't survive, so he's been leaving empty vodka bottles on the floor of his truck, answering the phone high, signaling us to say what we need to say and leave him. We see the smoke, but we don't leave. And we can't say everything. Instead, I filter inhales through my shirt and imagine switchbacking ashy hillsides to practice forgiveness. I wonder how the displaced in California will forgive the aerated limbs of dead oaks and the late summer wind that carried embers up to their roofs. No matter how many lies addicts tell us, an overdose is an act of honesty. In time, it seems as natural as a sapling. And who couldn't forgive a sapling, even as it grows in ash, even if it becomes embers in the wind? Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Erik. That was fantastic. Thank you. I don't know if we want to give like a round for like emoji claps or just like breather. That was really, it was truly amazing. And I miss hearing you read, so I'm so glad I get to be here to hear you again. All right. So our next poet. I felt truly grateful to be able to read this chapbook, this body of work. Heart-rending, heartbreaking, yes, but it's so intimate as it explores loss, being human, all parts of being human. As the poet writes, when I think about you, I miss most your understanding of how a terrible person I am in my core. And this particular line struck a chord with me as a reader because to me it's relatable. And how can I even write this? How do I express this complexity of being human that I wish to write, to express? She continues saying, the burden of carrying this darkness undetected in my chest is exhausting. I try to let it out here and there. Chavez executes. Her poems are fearless and brave, and they teach us about grief, longing, self-awareness, and accountability for those selves that we hold. But as she says in another poem, there was no sugarcoating, no pretending like it was okay, no blaming. And this encapsulates her work. There is no sugarcoating, no pretending. It is real. And that's what I mean when I say I'm grateful to have read it. Chavez bears the most difficult realities of love and loss and longing to continue a dialogue, which she continues in these poems. She gives us the truth, a truth that haunts, but she confronts each dream, each memory, every part that is dark with grit. She honors memory and embraces what comes after loss. These poems are a gift, and I keep saying thank you. I'm eager to hear these poems read out loud from her chapbook, like everything else we loved. Please welcome the fantastic poet, Sarah Chavez. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely, lovely intro. And I'd be happy to be Erik. Erik is awesome.
No, I was rereading my notes. I was like so nervous. Sarah Chavez.
You're doing awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica and Jefferson, for inviting me to be here. I love Fresno State, huge formative moments, and I love Fresno, even though I'm not there, although I will be there in 2 days, ironically. We're going to start our drive into the hotscape that is the valley soon, but it's like mini hot here, just with no air conditioners. I look forward to walking into a movie theater and being cold and then coming out to the car and then all the heat. Yeah, so thank you all so much. I'm grateful to be here. I have a proof. Oh, my dog just walked in the room. So it's possible he might want to join. I got my proof in the mail the other day, so I'm very excited. Porkbelly Press makes beautiful artifacts, just truly lovely. So even if you don't buy mine, I hope you buy something from them because they are really beautiful. So I will start with a few poems from here, and if there's time, I might read a couple from my new series because I'm kind of stoked about it. I've been living with these poems for a long time, so they have such a deep place in my heart. And in fact, so they are epistle elegies to Carol, who is the speaker's love who is past. I'm going to read the first poem in the chapbook, which sort of provides like context. Dear Carol, dermatologists call the body a trunk. I'm assuming you don't know this, since the only doctors you ever saw were the quack who signed the papers saying your heart and brain weren't fit for school, and the oncologist 15 years later who said your insides were poison. My problem is on the outside. These scaly flakes clustered on my elbows and knees, a stray spot on my calf. When they began to creep over the soft tan tissue of side breast, that's when I used my mediocre grown-up employed person health insurance to get the shit checked out. Kneecaps, whatever. Nobody looks at those, but my breasts, TBH, they aren't getting much attention either. But I don't need another reason to feel inadequate. Lost weight and weird nipples are all I can handle in the boobs department. So there I am in the white room, sitting on the white paper, covering the exam chair, wearing the backless white paper gown, bra unhooked in the back, straps loosely hanging. The doctor runs his fingertips on the side, swell and underneath, gentle, not like the hard pressing of an annual exam. Carefully, as if the skin might tear. I want to tell him I have thick skin, skin that's healed through all manner of scars and cuts, asphalt burns, fingernail scratches. Your nails were never long enough for scratching. Before I can brag about this skin's abuse, he says, what about the trunk? The trunk? I repeat. Yes, he says, any plaques on the trunk? He points at my torso, motions for me to move the gown aside, but I'm stuck on the word like a tree. If I am, then maybe these scales are my bark. I picture cutting open my insides and finding circles. Will those be my biological age or the artificial age augmented by sorrow? If you were a tree, you'd look wise from the outside, wide and sturdy, as if hundreds of circles wrapped around the heart. But cut open, they'd find the inside hollowed out by cancer. And like the tree in my front yard, marked by the city with a yellow plastic tie, you were hewn. The day the city came in large trucks heavy with machinery, I sat at the window and cried at every limb downed. And even though it took hours, I sat there and watched until the last act of removal, like a punishment, as if I deserved again to experience the destruction of something I cared about. They were always so lovely, the leaves in autumn, covering the front yard in what looked like hundreds of fallen stars. I would not rake them, but allow them to carpet the sidewalk and porch until their light burned out and brown and brittle they drifted away. Like losing you, the loss of the tree was quick. One day, diagnosis, the next, dust from the wood chipper coated the large hole in the grass where the stump was pulled out. A hole so big I could sit in it, so I did, and ran my hand along the edges of still roots, connectionless beneath the grassy surface. I put my tongue to the limb's ashes, sawdust caught in my lashes. Even so, I like the idea of being a tree. The dermatologist wouldn't sit opposite this sterile table suggesting compound creams and pills, but would praise the bark scales lapped one over the other, would appreciate the inherent roughness of this scarred trunk. I wouldn't have to convince anyone how thick my skin was. wouldn't have to correct this weathering. Dear Carol, in my dream last night, you are thin, so much thinner than you ever were in our waking life, skinny even. I asked what happened, gym membership? I had to shout this because the room has become cavernous, a ballroom in fact, great floor-length windows spaced around shimmering mirrors, a wooden dance floor, varnished slick. You twirl, and the skirt I didn't notice you wearing flares like the bell of a tulip, ridged and curvy, delicate. Scalpel, you answer. And I feel sad for those parts of you I don't get to see. It's not often we meet like this. You begin to sing under your breath. It's being piped through an overhead sound system. I hear it like a stage whisper, breathy in my ear. Nina Simone's I Put a Spell on You. I like this song, I say, shouting again to cover the distance and din of your voice reverberating against the mirrors. You don't respond. Keep singing, mouth moving a beat or two after I hear the lyric, like bad dubbing. You sweep your skirt forward and back, arms long and strangely elegant, the sort of lithy grace you always pointed out the women on television having. It looks like you're twirling toward me, and I'm eager to feel if your skin feels different, if the texture of your hair does, but you never get closer. I can't tell if that's on purpose or not. So in the larger collection, I love Jefferson's listening faces. It like gives me big hearts. In the larger collection, there are a lot of dreams, and it's something that I always kind of love reading because I think about grad school, and it wasn't any of these poems, but I had written a dream into a poem, and one of the other grad students said, "No, nobody likes poems about dreams anymore." So now, like all these years later, I'm like, another dream poem published. Using poetry for vengeance, not always for the best intention. So since Jessica read lines from this poem, I thought I would read the particular poem, Dear Carol, Even My Love is Selfish. I felt really emboldened, empowered by, because some of the poems I feel really embarrassed reading sometimes. They do feel vulnerable. But I feel excited now. And I'll just read two more from the collection, and then I'll read three or so from some newer work. Dear Carol, even my love is selfish. When I think about you, I miss most your understanding of how terrible a person I am in my core. Now, no one knows. No one that likes me anyhow. That's what made us different. You saw my worst, most self-indulgent, my meanest, locking my little sister in the kitchen pantry so I could go out, breaking Evelyn's new pink and white sequined compact mirror because she said I'd never be pretty without makeup, throwing your new pack of marbles into the toilet for whatever long forgotten reason I was pissed. You could look me square in the face and tell me to stop being a cunt, and I would, because I knew you didn't mean forever. You meant in that moment I had exceeded your patience, had to let you recharge. And the best part was that I saw the blackness in your soul, the jealous cruelty with which you treated strangers, heard scalding commentary on the appearance of passers-by, your glee learning of someone's failure. Those days, we took what we needed, knowing No one was going to help. Shoving nail polish and lipstick into our pockets at the drugstore, $20 from your mom's cashed SSI check. It was wrong, and we knew it. There was no sugarcoating, no pretending like it was okay, no blaming the crippling poverty that broke the windows of cars and shot warning bullets into the heads of bystanders. We didn't blame the lack of supervision because we supervised each other. Smart as any adult, compassionate as any priest, we made choices. The burden of carrying this darkness undetected in my chest is exhausting. I try to let it out here and there, razor slit between fingers, a new bar through cartilage. I imagine the badness will crawl through the crack in skin and find itself a new home, like you did. And this last poem from the chapbook is the title poem, sort of. Dear Carol, it hurts to look at things. I think because I'm seeing for us both, double irises and refraction, double anxiety and desire, double fear that this, like everything else we loved, will die unexpectedly. Maybe that's why it's so hard even to keep these Black letters in focus. I am the ink, your ghost skin, the paper, and the moment I stop writing, you'll disappear again, taking these words with you. So, I love writing epistles, and I think sort of as a way to kind of move myself out of the epistles, because I feel like maybe I would just keep writing epistles forever, which I guess is not technically a negative thing. I sort of had this like persona in my brain, and so I started a series of persona poems called Half-Breed Helene. And one of the things that I love about Fresno in particular is like what a diverse place it is, and how, even though despite it's so diverse, mixed identities and hybridity is still not talked about very much. There's still very much, you know, that like old school binaries of all kinds. And this is certainly not just Fresno. Just Fresno is lucky enough to have that mixing happening. Like we get to be together with lots of different people, and we get to love lots of different people. And so I had Half-Breed Helene kind of in my head. And I'll just read maybe, some of them are a little long, so I might maybe only get like 2 in. I'll do a third if it's shorter. So this one sort of opens the collection that I'm working on. The collection I'm working on is called Half-Breed Helene Navigates the Whole, but it's tentative. So Half-Breed Helene ponders her name in the numerology section of Barnes & Noble. Helene, the stereograph. Helene, French spelling, Greek meaning bright torch, light, pronounced with an een or an ain or an n sound at the end. Helene doesn't feel as current as the more forthright Helen or the airier Helena. Helene, origin and meaning, the name book. No, not Helen, classic, simple, not Helena, culturally specific, the name of sexy Latin actresses with full lips and dark lips and generous hips. Helene, hell, where demons jab the wicked in a river of fire. Lean, where her abuela says lazy day workers do against brick walls, smoking filterless cigarettes. I am not a lazy demon, Helene thinks indignantly, so loudly it made her lips move. And a name without nicknames too. No abbreviations for reprieve from the moldy 6-letter tyranny. She envies her friends who get cute intimacies to denote familiarity. Leti for Leticia, Angie for Angelica. She'd asked her mom once for a nickname or even a pet name. What about Len, she'd said, or Lenny? Her mother crooked an eyebrow. Hell, H had said. Even hell would be fine. Helene sounds so formal, so adult, the name of a quote unquote old soul, a despicable phrase said to and about her by men her father's age, asking her out while waiting tables in the evening or steaming milk for a latte in the morning. Ugh. And the pronunciation of Starbucks are atrocious. Those are the times she thinks, fuck it, and tries on names like Sally, Maria, or Erica. Such delightful straightforwardness. Her favorites, though, are the ambiguous, androgynous names like Sam, Sky, or Lupe. Better a quizzical canvas than misconceived. The reality, of course, is that H is a half Mexican, half Midwest white Californian with a French spelling of a Greek name. Like all things in her life, this nomenclature lacked clarity and singularity. It was, modestly put, a goddamn mess. So a lot of the collection is looking at the multiple intersectionalities that many, that we all embody. And so the poems are looking at like varieties of queerness and Latinidad and class experience. But I've been trying to sort of work more on I'm always a little gung-ho on the class stuff and on race and ethnicity. And so I'm trying to sort of push myself a little bit toward writing about like love or romance, but in ways that like feel natural to me. So this last two. Half-breed Helene cuts herself on the edges of what might be love. Teresa wants to start a fire in the pit behind the abandoned house on Chestnut Avenue to warm the skin on their bodies. This would be a fire for the outside of what has already been a fire brewing in the depths of Helene's gut. What do we have that burns? The question, spoken from Teresa's mouth, heavy and double-sided, lands embedding in the cavern of H's ear. No matter what flames, H is coming to believe she'll never be cold again. Half-breed Helene's taste in people is weird. At least that's what Teresa says. And Helene supposes this must be accurate if Teresa, beautiful, calm, decidedly well-adjusted Teresa thinks so. It's not even really tasting people, but tumbling into infatuation with characters. Screw the actor. H doesn't want to know they're just like a real person, which isn't true anyway. The reality most likely is they're drinking wine by a pool in Beverly Hills with their designer dog. That information ruins everything. Because then she must consider that they are rich or business savvy or like one of the well-off high maintenance customers that talk condescendingly sweet to her at the restaurant. She only puts up with overly friendly hands for the tips, otherwise fuck them. Example, Helene does not moon over Josh Brolin, but she has become entranced by young Josh Brolin as Wild Bill Hickok in the late 80s, early 90s television series, The Young Writers. Jimmy, that's what his friends call him, is sweet and sad and wants to be a good person, but has the terrible gift of being the fastest gun and needs her parts, which according to the show is most parts. The long sandy hair flowing from beneath his dusty Stetson looks soft like a Pantene commercial. The hands he brushes the horses with are nub-nailed and callous. H can't help but daydream a little about the tension of texture in this one body. The fine silk of hair, the wood bark of palms. She imagines them reading to each other while leaning against a dusty fence post, him practicing his reading because he didn't get to finish schooling, and her gently correcting his pronunciation. His teeth are straighter than anyone's would have been in that time, straighter than most of the people she knows who even had a retainer, but she doesn't hold that bit of inconvenient perfection against Josh Brolin, AKA James Butler Hickok. They will drink sarsaparilla and share humps of bread in the sinking dusk. However, Brolin in Goonies as the hunky, muscular older brother, no thank you. Brolin as the rich kid in the episode of 21 Jump Street, most certainly not. What a garbage human. That sandy hair was cut short and those straight teeth menaced beneath a vomit-inducing smirk. And speaking of 21 Jump Street, young Johnny Depp, pre-insanity and domestic violence and alcoholism, no thank you. Hanson, no thank you. No thank you, Gilbert Grape. No thank you, Don Juan. But Benny and June, Edward Scissorhands crybaby. The greasiness of his hair only shows how unconcerned he is with his appearance, except in Crybaby, because that's the look. Oh, Ratchet Face holds such a sweet place in Helene's heart. Johnny's characters are too busy being quirky and awkward, arty and mooing, obsessed with someone else who is sad and feeling misaligned with the world. H realizes that other than Teresa, all her crushes are sad. When she's being honest, she can say that she's sad. And when these soft lines, masculine presenting people are sad and they love sad people, and that maybe two sad people make a strange kind of math, sad plus sad equals happy, that means there is hope for her. She doesn't dream to not be sad. H can't even imagine how that might feel. Her sadness has become weighted presence on her chest, anchoring her to the world. If it were to lift, she'd likely float unbridled, unbidden, untethered into the sky, which would take her out of everything that feels important. What's up there to do so hard? Not mopping and watering plants, not serving food and going to school. She's learned she can do all the normalities of living while sad, sad, sad. And it would just be a little bit lovely to be sad with someone else who will also hold their sadness stoically until the evening when they're both home from tending horses or trimming hedges and can lie in the dark holding one another, lost in the electric exchange of melancholy that flows from each of their fingers as they outline each other's full and trembling lips. Thank you.
That was awesome. The voice you bring to your poetry is fantastic. Like, just brought everything to life. Thank you so much, Sarah. And now we'll transition into our Q&A. So I want to open this up to the audience and encourage you to ask questions. Don't want to hear me talk anymore. So please, does anybody have any questions for the poets? You can also drop them in the chat. I can read them. Okay, Jefferson has a question for Erik. I've always loved the tenderness in your poetry, especially toward your father. You navigate general traumas, I think, with a beautiful generosity. How has the publishing of your debut book changed or not changed your outlook toward your family?
That's a fantastic question. I think one of the things that I'm doing and what I can do, especially in poems like about surviving, is making stories where there were sort of like half stories, or there were these omissions in my family story. There were lots of those. And I think I grew resentful toward my family for having all these secrets and omissions, and it made me feel, kind of orphaned by that. And I think poetry has given me this vehicle for using the lyric to kind of home myself and my own family by building these stories. And so, I think one of the things that Fresno State taught me in my time there was that the truth is so much more important than the facts, right? And so I'm taking these little pieces of things that I don't really necessarily know to be factual, but I'm building these stories that I know to be true based on the people that are involved in them, and I think that that the stories involve, and I think that in doing so, I'm really not necessarily using the facts to build the story. I'm using feelings to build the story, and really, I mean, our experiences are just how we feel about them anyway, aren't they? So I think the craft has really helped me do that, and it's been an amazing, powerful tool for navigating grief, but also for feeling more connected to the members of my family who I still who are still alive, and I get to have experiences with. I have deeper experiences with them now because of navigating the grief through the poems in this book.
Thank you. We have another question from Everett Jones. You both have very tender, complex, and emotional chapbooks coming out in Gulp 2022. What are your feelings about these books at this time? So this is a question for both of you, whoever wants to answer first.
I can answer first. Well, I don't think I have a good answer. Sometimes I forget what year it is. I'll be real honest. It's time is moving in such a strange and cyclical way, and way too fast. But I think one of the things that I like, and in this chapbook in particular, because I started the series quite a while ago, and I stopped sending it out for a long time, because I felt like they weren't relevant somehow, that they were like, I don't know, too niche, or that wasn't something folks would be interested in. And now we all can't stop talking about grief. And it's so sadly, I mean, I think for all the reasons we lose people, and I think people lost so much during the pandemic, that there's a new openness to talk about grief. And so there's something that I've been thinking about and writing about for all these years, it does actually feel relevant in a way that I don't think it felt relevant to me before, which is very sad, but also I'm happy that we're able to recognize that grief is an important thing to process.
Erik, did you have anything to add to how you feel about your book? What are your feelings about your book at this time? Or
I don't know if I have anything to say necessarily. That I mean, I love what Sarah said about the context and the moment, and I don't know. I think I can just pass because I do have somewhat of an answer, but I feel like it's just going to send us down this really long rabbit hole about what it just means to publish something so intimate, which is something that I hadn't really done on this scale until this book came out. And so I would say that one thing that was really interesting for me, I'll just say this, was that this is a very odd book for me to celebrate. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of poets experience when they write about loss, or they write about something that was really emotionally challenging for them, is that there are all these people in your lives who want to give you congratulations for getting a book published, and they want you to sort of celebrate it. But I don't know. It's not necessarily like I don't want to celebrate. I want to celebrate poetry, right? I want to celebrate the poems themselves. It feels a little odd celebrating it as a personal accomplishment because of what it cost me, and what it costs not just me, but other members of my family, and obviously my father, So that's what I have to say about that without going on and on about it.
Thank you. I understand completely. Writing poems that are very intimate and then they're published, it is kind of hard to celebrate them. for me anyway, sometimes I have even feelings of guilt. So, so thank you. Those are great answers. I have another question from Jefferson, and it's for Sarah. I've always loved your persona poems, especially the ones starring half-breed Helene in all her liminal spaces. What do you hope for Helene as her experiences now start coming together for your next project?
That's a very poignant question. As I got funding to finish it, the collection, and I'm still pretty far. I'm not far from having the number of poems that are necessary for a collection. But I think that's one of the issues I've been navigating with, is that I kind of like, I can see her so clearly in certain things, and it's like I move in one groove, and then I realize like I've forgotten in a way about all of the other intersectionalities until like pops up in a poem, right? Like the way, you know, I can't actually disentangle class and how we're treated, how our bodies are treated in workspaces from our gender and sexuality and our self-esteem and our race. And so I think sometimes they feel disparate, even though it's one person's experience, and it is experiences based on my experience. And so I think that's the thing I'm maybe fighting a little bit, is kind of what is the scope, I guess, of age? Like, is this stay like full, like very young adult? Does it move later? So I'm excited. In some of the poems, Helene has like 3 different jobs, and sometimes it's at the same time, and sometimes it's at different times. And so it's, yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I used to like kind of roll my eyes a little bit when fiction writers were like, I like the character, tell me where to go. And I'm like, sure you do, buddy. I know you have that big like thing written out on your wall, like we all do eventually. But now I like get it. Sorry, fiction writers, you're all amazing. And I see it now. I'm kind of waiting for Helene to tell me what direction to move in.
Well, I had one question, which you kind of already answered, Sarah, because I didn't know this was going to be a part of a bigger collection, but I wanted to ask both of you, because these books are very, as people have described, tender and very intimate. Do you see them, I guess this is more pointed towards you, Erik, but do you see this becoming a larger collection? Or even Sarah, like, how did you like go from these intimate poems to creating a larger piece of work? Erik, do you see this being a larger collection, or does it only live in this space?
I was sort of glad that it got published as a chapbook, and because it sort of allows me now to move on and start to tackle some other subject matter when it dominated my thoughts and it dominated my emotional state for so long that I think that, is there more to say? Definitely. But I think that if I'm going to say more, it's going to happen with more perspective after years of experience. So maybe as I'm reflecting, when I start to reach the ages that my father lived that I've never lived, maybe I'll start to see his experiences from a different angle and come back and reapproach this content. But I don't have plans to put it or to expand it right now. Like I said, I was kind of glad that it was published because it allows me, I almost immediately started writing about more externally, actually, right when the book was published and I was like talking to the publisher, I knew it was going to be published and we started working through all the proofs and everything. I immediately started to write poems that were more externally oriented and not about my personal experience as much, and started to write about the landscape of 2020 and everything we all experienced as Americans in that time. And that was a big challenge for me because I had written so much about, and I basically cut my teeth writing about my personal experiences. And so to step back and not be so internally oriented and be a little more externally oriented. And it was interesting because I was able to take a lot of the same like intimacy and care, and those have become, I should say, really useful, powerful tools for writing about the world outside of my experience. And yeah, I don't know how much else to say about that, but I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you did perfectly. I don't know, Sarah, did you want to add anything about how this chapbook is going to be a part of a larger collection, or that collection?
I'll just say quickly, I never intended it to be a collection. I did it I did the first one as an exercise in the class. That was a forms class, and I was feeling a little grumpy about like received forms because I was like decolonial. And then and we had a book. This is Grace Bowers when I was in my PhD program. So I just picked the epistle, and I was like, well, that felt very cathartic. I'll just do a couple of these. And then like, a decade later, well, not quite a decade, but many, many years later, still. So I guess I feel like our best laid plans, it all goes to wherever the universe sort of wants to.